Well, I think we can get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's presentation. I'm Sarah Gorecki, and I'm the Director of Publishing at the Colorado Mountain Club. This evening, we have Flint, Quade, Cody, and Tyle, the four climbing Smiths, who will share excerpts from their father's memoir, The Bark of the Cony, this book right here, and tell stories from climbing all of the 14ers in the 1960s. Tonight, The Bark of the Cony book will be 20% off on our website, cmcpress.org, which I'll put in the chat. And I also wanted to mention, for those of you who are not yet Colorado Mountain Club members, our next new member orientation will be August 17th, and I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. So I'm sure you're all quite familiar with being on Zoom by now, but here are some friendly Zoom reminders. First, please keep your microphones muted, and please keep your cameras off during the presentation. This really helps with internet bandwidth. Just as a reminder, the session is being recorded, and please put all of your questions in the chat box. We will do a Q&A at the end of the talk. And with that, I will turn it over to Keegan Young. Keegan is the Colorado Mountain Club's Executive Director, and he's going to introduce our speakers.
Well, thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone here tonight and your continued love and support of the Colorado Mountain Club. I have to say, I moved to Colorado about 10 years ago, specifically for a love of climbing and the mountains. And it was the 14ers that got me into it from one of my closest friends who's on this call tonight, Phil Lakin. And the thing is, you know, we were driving from Tulsa through the night, bringing the kids up here and trying to climb the 14ers. And it's, you know, no small part did George inspire me to be a better dad and get these kids out more often and doing the 14ers. And I was proud, you know, bringing a 13-year-old across the knife edge on Capitol, let alone an 8-year-old. So, you know, it's something we all need as role models and people to emulate. And, you know, George absolutely, you know, was that for a lot of us. And I think the family unit and spending those times in the mountains together is really, really powerful. You know, over the course of 3 summers from 1966 to 1968, Flint, Quade, Cody, and Tyle, and along with their dad, George, climbed all the Colorado 14ers. And they finished, as I said, with the youngest. Tyle was 8 years old. Now, in this memoir, Bark of the Cony, George Nash Smith tells of the key life experiences that led to his attitude of challenging himself and the development of his unique life philosophy, not if, but how. Through mountain climbing, he learned a love of nature, and he imparted his life philosophy to these 4 sons. So I'm going to turn it over to them, allow themselves to introduce each of them, starting with the oldest to youngest, and then they'll kick off their presentation.
Yeah, so that would be me as the oldest, Flint. And yeah, I'm thinking that this was 50 years ago or 51 years ago. It does tax the memory at times, but welcome everybody.
My name's Quade. I'm the second oldest.
Cody. There's a trend here. Third on the way down. Long time, at least in my adult years, CMC member and supporter.
And I'm Tyle.
Welcome to you all. We're happy you're here. We're going to talk about our dad's book, The Bark of the Cony. All 4 of us will talk at some point. It's a family story, and it starts with our dad, and he adapted to hardship at a very early age. But when we get to the portion of us climbing together, we learned a lot of skills and life lessons through the outdoors. We developed a capable team built on trust. And this was a time when we did a lot of exploration and had adventures, and it was it was well before the internet. And so the guidebooks available were a valuable resource, but it came down to using maps and a compass and looking at the terrain and figuring out where to go from here. It's also, of course, about the 14ers. Here's a photo of our dad. He's in the middle. These are his siblings. His eldest sister, Kay, is on the left of the screen. Below her is his elder brother, Tupper. He's in the middle. This is before he injured his right hand and arm. His mom there, and his sister, Dorothy, and his other brother, Keen. He was born in Denver in 1928. He was the youngest of 5 children. And at that time, they hadn't developed sulfa drugs. So he ended up losing his thumb and his first finger because of gangrene. His family did what they could to help him adapt. As he grew up, he believed he should perform at least as well as the next guy. He was competitive. He was an Eagle Scout at age 14. And during World War II, he happened to be the oldest boy who was an Eagle Scout. And so he took on the role of being the acting adult leader. He lettered in baseball in East High School here in Denver, and he was the senior class president. Here's a photo of him. He could hit for average, not for power. His right hand just stabilized the bat. He would be in the outfield and he'd catch the ball, toss it in the air, tuck his glove under his right armpit, catch the ball again and throw it. And he could do that very efficiently. Cody will talk about his college years.
So if you had time to read all of that article on the prior page, which I'm just joking, at the very bottom, it says that in the interview with Frank Haraway, that what Dad wanted to do was go to agricultural college and then get in the cattle business. So he got half of that. He did go to Colorado A&M, which has now in the fullness of time become CSU, and graduated in something that my brothers will correct me, but the equivalent of animal husbandry, something like that. And while he was there, he joined a fraternity and met a lot of his, what became lifetime close friends there. And he met our mom, his wife, Mary Lou Milano, at a dance. And it was kind of interesting because she also went to East High School, but was 2 years behind him, knew of him because he was a little bit of a famous character in high school, but he didn't know her. But they found each other starting at a college square dance. I don't think that Dad was the square dance caller at that dance, but he did volunteer once and to learn square dancing from a standing start. He was never one to shirk a challenge. Somebody approached him on behalf of the university and said, we have this big weekend festival coming up. Do you know anyone who can call a square dance? And Dad decided that he was that person who could call a square dance. And so he did learn, and little did he know he was going to be doing that for the next 70 years. One of the things that he learned from his fraternity brothers was how to play the guitar. Flint's our resident guitar player, and he knows a little bit more about this story, which you can imagine for a one-armed man is not a trivial thing to do.
No, and back to his arm, in those days, you would have thought they would have amputated the whole thing, but it ended up with some compartment syndrome, and as Quade said, gangrene. His 3 middle fingers are pretty fixed. He lost his little finger and his thumb. His elbow was fused. It had a small range of motion, but his shoulder worked. Bob Square, who actually made a few albums back in the day with his country western band, helped my father invent a thumb that went around his hand so that he could strum a guitar. He could play the chords with his left hand. And with that, he eventually went on. That's how he got me started playing the guitar, was with his old Martin that he had. But that is, again, not if, but how. They figured out how to give him a thumb so he could strum.
So the obviously to the right of those two guitar players who are my dad's friends was soon to be Mrs. George N. Smith, mom on my dad's car with the Colorado A&M A in the background. So I think if you went to CSU or Colorado A&M, eventually you're going to notice that huge mountain to the west. And for a lot of people up there, it calls for them. And eventually George and his friend Warren answered that call and decided that they better go climb Long's Peak because it just seems like a waste not to. And the experience was, as Dad called it in the book, a yay boo thing. And I think the yay part was that eventually it was over. And the boo part was that it just wasn't that much fun. And they left that day. I think they got back to Fort Collins that night thinking, okay, we don't need to do that again. That was a lot of work and not that enjoyable. But as I don't know if any of you have ever had that experience on a mountain thinking maybe that day wasn't that enjoyable. I think I might have had one or two like that. But eventually, as it settled in, the pain fades and the feeling of accomplishment grows and the recognition of the team effort settles in. And they decided, Dad importantly decided, you know what, that actually was a pretty cool experience and I should do more of that. And his naming of his book of stories, The Bark of the Cony, came from a rest stop that he and Warren had on the way down, and a scene that's more fully described in the book, but that it stuck with Dad obviously forever. And you can learn a little bit more about Cony if Flint will help me out.
Yeah, the Cony thing. We thought conies were conies. We didn't know they were picas until way into our teenage years. The Dutch name, if you pronounce it, is Cony. Coney Island in New York was there's an argument whether there's a Coney Island off of Ireland, and the Irish came, and there's kind of a melding of the fact that means rabbit. So it was Rabbit Island. And then when the miners came out here, they saw the little pica up there and with the ears, and it is related to rabbits. And so they called it a coney. And that's what Dad called it. He knew it as a coney. We knew it as a coney. As again, like I said, I didn't realize it was a pica until later on in life. So that's kind of where that came from. You can look that up. You can Google Cony or pica, and it'll give you some history on that. But they're pretty durable little animals up there.
Thanks, Flint.
So our dad and our mom began dating. She went through college in 3 years, graduated in 1951, and shortly after she graduated, they married. Dad and his friend Warren Pulis took 2 summers looking for uranium. and they had different camps, and they'd move around and had a Geiger counter and a hammer. And they also were in business together in the chinchilla business, Kamer Nash chinchillas. But during these few years, Dad climbed several other 14ers, some with Warren, some with our mom, some with his fraternity brothers. He also then began to be a property manager for Monte Carlo and Company. Mom and Dad had 4 sons, the 4 of us, and they wanted us all, Dad in particular, wanted us all to have unique names, Western sounding names, because he really didn't like his name George, and George Smith was very common. So Nash was his unique part of his name, and he wanted all of us to have uncommon names. Here we are. Cody's on the left. Tyle's youngest, of course. Flint's behind him. And there I am on the right, and our dog Mocha. And she climbed a lot of peaks with us over the years. But they built a family home in the outside of town, and it was completed in 1958. And he built a square dance hall called the Outpost. And that's on the lower right picture. And that was completed in 1961. He also started his own real estate brokerage. Flint will introduce us as we began climbing. Flint and I climbed the first peak for ourselves was in 1962.
Yeah, it was up on Mount Sherman, and you can see the register of that day. And there weren't that many people that climbed Mount Sherman that day. I remembered it because Quade accidentally knocked a rock on my foot. Of course, we're wearing tennis shoes or street shoes or windbreaker. I got a cowboy hat on there, so that's perfect for keeping your head warm. Back to the Outpost, if I can digress. At that time, there were 5 square dance halls if you counted the Outpost. Now the Outpost is the only one left in Denver. The others have gone by the wayside. And then with Sherman, Dad also said that we ought to try everything twice. That first mountain wasn't much fun. I don't know how Quade felt about it, but we eventually did do another mountain, obviously, and kept going. But back to the gear, it wasn't fancy. And if you can imagine, back in the 60s, this was before climbing became what climbing became. We eventually got to move up to J.C. Penney work boots. We had a little ankle support then, but we still had jean jackets and cotton shirts and didn't know about wool back then. Dad carried an old Army rucksack, and those were heavy. That was canvas, not lightweight like we have now. The canteen was metal, and he carried all the weight. So eventually we got to improve our footwear and some of our clothes. Cody then got to be the next one since Quade and I climbed. A couple years later, Cody got his first one.
Right, so there we are. Cody's on the left, Quade in the middle, Flint on the right. And in case you didn't think we were serious on the prior slide that said we were using dress shoes, look at my footwear there on the left. Those are my black lace-up shoes. So we did eventually get better footwear, but it wasn't right away. That's for sure. And obviously, look, we're in cotton stuff. I think there might have existed better gear then, but apparently we weren't aware of it. Next for Tyle.
My first peak was Mount Sherman as well. And I was really excited to go along with my brothers. I got to go climbing with them. That was going to be great. So we parked below the Levick mine and got out of the car, and I immediately started running, and I tripped over a rock and landed on my face. That was my start. Then, so we started hiking, and about 100 yards into the hike up the road, I was tired, and I said, "Dad, I'm tired." And I sat down, and Dad came next to me, kneeled down, and said, "Tyle, we got a long way to go. You see that peak up there? That's where we're going. That's Mount Sherman." And he pointed it out, and he said, "It's not going to be easy, but if you just put one foot in front of the other, you'll get there. Set a pace for yourself." And he showed me how to breathe in rhythm with my steps. And eventually, lo and behold, I made it to the top. So a point of note, Flint and Quade and all of our first 14ers, all three of them, there were only, in two occasions, there's only our names on the register. No one else climbed that day. And these were Saturdays. Every one of us climbed our first peak on a Saturday. So today you might find hundreds of people.
Well, I want to add a thank you to Katie Souter in the CMC AAC library, because she's helped us track down these register pages.
So a memorable climb in 1966 for me was Columbia. We did Columbia from the east. It was about an 18-mile round trip, and our dog Moke was with us. And Cody had upgraded, as you see, from dress shoes to JCPenney construction boots. So we all had on our extra clothes, and we're not even out of timberline because it's raining, and it's gonna rain on and off all day. And we're faced with ridge after ridge. It was miserable. And I complained about my hands being cold and my wet mittens. And I remember Dad coming to my rescue and warming my hands up, and he wasn't wearing gloves. And I was impressed by that. I thought, how can he not be cold? And I thought he was extremely tough, and he was. The visibility was poor, and we were excited as we got to the top of the ridge because we thought that might be the summit, but it wasn't. We kept running into false peak after false peak. And us kids were getting kind of tired of it, and we actually spoke up and said, "Dad, this is ridiculous. Let's go back." And he said, "I tell you what, if this next peak isn't the summit, I'll give you each $5. And somehow we thought that was reasonable, so we kept going. And sure enough, it was the top. And so we made it. That's great, but we didn't get $5.
No.
So this is a list of the peaks we climbed, the 14ers we climbed in 1966. And as you notice, they're all pretty close to Denver, most of them, except for Sneffels. And they're all pretty easy, relatively easy. Now, Dad was a real estate broker by day and a square dance caller by night on the weekday nights. So if we were going to climb, we'd get in the car after his dance on a Friday night, and we'd drive to the trailhead and sleep. And we always got there rather late. And so we always slept late into the morning, and we always got a late start. That was our MO. That's how we did it. And Dad would do all the driving back then because Flint, the oldest, was only 14. And we climbed a total of 12 14ers in 1966. Next.
Yeah, so consequently, we did a lot of work at night. Not on purpose, but because we're kids and it took us a while. So we got good at night work.
So in the next summer, 1967, our first effort in June was Pikes Peak. And sometime maybe the next day after climbing Pikes Peak at dinner, a discussion broke out, and we agreed, we talked about and thought about and decided, okay, well, it's maybe maybe we should see if we can keep a busy summer climbing schedule and finish the 53 14ers before Tyle is ancient, while he's still 8 years old. And we knew that Bob Melzer was 9 when he finished with his dad in 1937. Back there, then there were 52, and I think one of them, I think Grizzly, then shrunk, and then so there were 51. But anyway, they climbed 52 in one long summer, I think 67 days. And we decided, okay, well, let's go ahead and do that. We're having enough fun, a good enough time. And somehow in that discussion, the way we would sign the register, which you might have noticed on the Mount Sherman register for Flint and Quade, Dad signed in OMC because he was kind of tickled that everybody belonged to a club like CMC and just used their initials. So he would sign in as OMC, which to him meant own mountain club. He was his own mountain club. But we decided, since he had his square dance barn called the Outpost, and you know, now there were 5 of us climbing, that we would become in our own minds the Outpost Mountain Club. So also, by the way, I'm going to save that for later. So gradually we've got to climb all the peaks. Eventually you got to climb the harder and harder ones. So in 1967, we climbed Pyramid Peak, and you can, you know, if you've been on Pyramid, and this is the old route on the west side of the peak, but there's some tricky couloir work. There's some route finding. There's some cairns that are in the wrong place and shouldn't be relied upon. There's rockfall danger. There's some technical climbing. It was a for us sort of a step up in the challenge, and thankfully we did fine. And so before we go forward, I want to point out in the left picture how much snow there is on Snowmass Mountain back there, which we have fond memories of snowy summers, and we hope one day we'll return to that. So along with this thought of getting, trying harder mountains, gradually improving our skills, we really did think of climbing as an apprenticeship, or more accurately, our dad and Flint did. Flint was the technical skill guy. And so when we thought about climbing the Crestone peaks, Dad asked a woman he knew from square dancing, Virginia Nolan, who was a CMC member, if she wanted to go along with us. And she said, well, in essence, I'll go if my occasional climbing partner, Bill Arnold, will go. And so Bill and Virginia went with us on the Crestones. I want to point out that keep track of the good looking sweater I'm wearing there, just right next to Bill, that red and gray sweater. And Tyle's cotton sweatshirt says, "Curse you, Red Baron." And so it was a fond, I think Tyle might still have it. He might still wear it. And Quade's wearing a football jersey, and Flint's got a short sleeve dress shirt on. So we're still not quite, we've got some fashion evolution to go through. One more thing to say is that on the Crestone needle, so this is 1967, the register on the Crestone needle was put up there in 1959 and didn't need to be removed until 1971. So it had 12 years of climbers on it. We know not everybody signs the register, but I think the preponderance of people did at that time. So there's a stark contrast, obviously, between then and now on that topic. Okay, next. So just a little segue to talk about Bill Arnold and Virginia Nolan. They were, they were incredibly accomplished climbers and also well-regarded and loved members of the Colorado Mountain Club. Bill lived down in Pueblo and was a member of the Pikes Peak group until they started the El Pueblo group. He was a very educated man with Amherst and Yale degrees. And he was one of the early climbers, finishing the 14ers in 1950. And when he passed away, he was on his 4th time around. Virginia finished in 1952, was the 40th person. And she also was straight away the next summer, I think, went out to the West Coast and climbed the 14ers on the West Coast. And she was the 3rd one, just the Melzers, 15 years before, we think were earlier than she. So you can see in the map, I know it's hard to exactly identify, but if you just read the peaks, obviously 1967 is full of more technically challenging peaks where we had to not just walk on the trail where it was no big deal if you tripped and fell over, to needing to be careful and cautious and, keep 3 points of contact on the rock and to look out more for each other and to be sharp about route finding. So we were gradually developing better skills. Next.
In 1968, we had several memorable climbs. One of the early ones was Capitol Peak, and that was in June. This photo on the left is from a lesser peak called K2, right before the knife edge, and it's looking towards Snowmass Mountain over here, and on the left are the bells, but there's quite a bit of snow in the basin. The right-hand photo is us coming back across the ridge. When we went across, we sat, we scooted. We didn't really rope up. We all felt confident unroped, but coming back, we walked, and it was a difficult climb. But we got it done. In July, we made our second attempt on El Diente. The year before, we had not been successful. But our margin, if we wanted to accomplish our goal, our margin for trying yet another time was getting less, smaller chance to come back again. So we were fairly motivated to climb El Diente. Here we are at the Rock of Ages and looking across Navajo Basin towards El Diente. And it stayed pretty miserable all day. It got even worse, in fact. On the right-hand photo, you see us. We had to pause and we did a chant. We had come across a Native American chant in a restaurant and memorized it. We don't really know what the words mean, but we chanted it and stomped our feet together in rhythm, and our intention was that it would clear the skies for us and make it passable. So after an hour, indeed, that's what happened. So we were really pleased because at this point, all that we had left to do out of the 53 peaks was the Maroon Bells and then Snowmass. And we had had a successful time with Bill Arnold on the Creststones and asked him to guide us on the Maroon Bells. And he agreed. We talked and shared that we wanted to do the ridge. And he said, well, if you're thinking of doing the ridge, there might be a need to rappel. So you might learn how to do that. And so Flint took that on, and we set up a makeshift. Well, Flint, please go ahead.
Yeah. Again, back in the 60s, there weren't too many ways to learn how to rappel, and one of the main ways was the Dulfer sits. We were all Boy Scouts, which we'll talk about later. Halybar was an organization that made climbing gear up in Boulder, and they'd had a store down in Cherry Creek on like 3rd and Columbine. And so, me being the oldest in the Boy Scouts, we used Sears and Roebuck sleeping bags, which weighed about 10 pounds each. That's what we backpacked with to go into like the Creststones and other places. They required a backpack. I decided I needed a down bag, and I got a Halybar bag. And so I got introduced to a Halybar down there. We bought a book called Freedom of the Hills. And Freedom of the Hills back then showed us how to do a Dulfer sits. So we kind of set up the ladder and a board, and we bought a gold line rope so that we could practice. And we all learned how to do a Dulfer sit so that we could do the bells. Ironically, I was the only one that rappelled when we did the ridge. The other guys climbed down. So, but it still came in handy, and it started our progression to more technical things, thanks to that book from the Mountaineers in Seattle.
So the left photo is us on top. The left photo is us on top of Maroon Peak, and we had successfully crossed the ridge, and so all that was remaining was to go down. We continued on and went down a snow couloir on the shoulder. And on the right photo, we were goofing around a little bit because all that we had to do was snowmass, and we looked forward to it. It was a 9-mile pack-in, but hey, we'd done the real challenging things, and so we did the bells on the 12th of July, and on the 14th, we backpacked into Snowmass Lake. And here on Snowmass Mountain, the left photo shows us right below the peak. And this was a unique experience in that day we climbed, and there were a total, counting us, there were 25 signatures. And that in part was because people from the Ashcrofters, a guide mountaineering group, had taken a bunch of students up there. So in fact, they took this photo on the left for us. Photo on the right, we're congratulating ourselves. At this time, we had climbed all 53 peaks. Tyle was 8 years old, and Cody was 11. I was 12, and Flint, this was his birthday. Flint had just turned 16. And the red colors show the peaks climbed in 68. And of those on the list, at least 5 of them, and one could argue the Needle Mountains, Windham, Sunlight, and Euless are somewhat challenging. But so a yet higher percentage of peaks were difficult and required attention and care. Cody?
So after that summer and we climbed them all, there was a little bit of fanfare, and we gave, when I say we, I really mean Dad, gave a few slideshows. And there was an occasion, and maybe one of our brothers will remember if Bob Melzer was a square dancer or not, but Bob Melzer and Tyle Smith meet. Bob was the man who, as a boy, finished the 14ers when he was 9 years old in 1937. So that was kind of a cool thing to have happened. And when Bob and his dad Carl finished the 14ers, they were the 5th and 6th people. And when we finished, we think we were 96 through 100. So in those 30 years, basically an average, I know it wasn't linear, of three finishers a year through 1968. So this was still very much in the quiet period of of 14er attention. So here's some of the fanfare that went with it. The Denver Post used to have a Sunday magazine they called Empire Magazine, and one of their outdoor and adventure reporters, Cal Queel, thought this would make a interesting story. And he's really the one that put the word climbing in front of Smiths in the saga of the Climbing Smiths. We don't always introduce ourselves that way, but we're not offended by the attachment. We think of ourselves as Climbing Smiths. Next.
So after finishing the 14ers in Colorado in 1968, we made a family decision to go climb the rest of the 14ers on the West Coast. Dad, and to do that, we knew that the California peaks were a little bit different. And to do that, Dad was able to talk to the only two people that he knew that had climbed the 14ers in California. And that was Carl Melzer and Virginia Nolan. And he got their perspective on what we could expect out in California. So Flint was asked to procure all the gear and the food and pack the car and organize it and make a climbing itinerary. And so in addition to the input from Carl and Virginia, Flint referred to the guidebooks at the time and topographical maps to make our climbing itinerary. We started our trip on August 10th, 1969 in the early afternoon, and with the intention of being through with everything and successful and back to Denver by September 1st so that we could attend the school year and start on time. That was important to our mother. Well, less than 24 hours later, we had totaled the car about 80 miles west of Ely, Nevada. After totaling the car, I remember saying to Dad that, maybe this is a bad omen. Maybe we shouldn't go on. And he got us all together and said, this is just a bump in the road. We're going to go on. Let's see if we have what it takes to handle the obstacles that happen along the way. That was his philosophy. So we got towed back to Ely, Nevada, and Dad bought a 1953 Chevy station wagon from a gentleman by the name of Leo Curto. And unfortunately, we needed all our cash, so Leo accepted, I guess it's not unfortunately, it's fortunately, he accepted an IOU from Dad for the $225 that Alan Olson, which is what we named the vehicle, cost. So he trusted us, and that was not unusual for Dad. He did mention, though, that Alan Olson burned a little bit of oil, so we might have to check that every fill up. Keep that in mind. So we got to Lone Pine, California, and we were scheduled to climb Langley, and we started out to climb Langley that next morning, and we got a late start, which we were accustomed to doing, and it was we did it from Owens Valley, Tuttle Creek Trailhead. We started it anyway, and we, for some reason, we just didn't feel right. We hiked about a mile and most of it on a trail, but then the trail quit, and we said, we don't have it in us today. Well, why don't we go climb White was the answer. We can climb White because there's a road all the way to the top of White, and if it gets dark, we can just come back on the road and we'll be fine. And that's what we did. So then we drove back down through Lone Pine to Tuttle Creek Trailhead again, but by that time it was early the next morning, And we slept late again into the next morning and got a late start again. So we started up the summit ridge, and you can see the photo on the left is us at the White Mountain Trailhead. And then the photo on the right is the top of Langley in the background. Quade's leading the way. Now it's almost sunset and we're just about to get to the top. So it was a long trip, about, over 7,000 vertical feet. And it was hot and dry. Now, and Cody and Flint were in shorts. On the way down, we hiked for hours in the dark. And we finally got down to the tree line area and ran into a grove of nettles, stinging nettles. And Cody and Flint were just massacred. They were miserable. And the rest of us kept getting our hands into them. And that's when Dad blurted out, "Isn't this fun, Jimmy?" And we started laughing. And there was born our friend and companion, Jimmy, who was with us, imaginary Jimmy, who was with us for the rest of our journey. So we ended up bivouacking. We didn't get down to the car. We bivouacked under a tree. And the next morning got down to the car, drove into Lone Pine, and got a motel room at the Dow Villa, and then found a fantastic restaurant called Bobo's Bonanza. And we ate our fill there. It was, the food was fantastic. It was plentiful, big portions. We really like Bobo's.
So it came time to do a group of 5 peaks, the Whitney group. Mount Whitney is accessed by trail. It's here on the left. And from the Whitney portal, it's 11 miles. And we had a 50-mile loop, or longer than 50-mile loop. And we had full backpacks, but the unique thing was it wasn't all going to be on the trail. We had to go cross country at times. And little did we know how much of a toll that would take on us. So the photo on the right, we're on top of Mount Whitney. We're looking north to Mount Russell. And we headed off on our own. Well, here we are working our way with full packs up to the Russell Ridge. And we could tell we were slow. So we had this idea that why don't we leave our packs on the ridge? We had 2 more peaks to go, but let's go get Tyndall and Williamson with 1 day's worth of food and come back and get our gear and then load up with these heavy packs and go out from there. Well, I should make one further note. At the time we did Russell, it was, from all intents and purposes, the least climbed 14er, in that the original register, which had been put up by Norman Clyde in 1926, was still there. And we signed that. The photo on the right, we've left our packs. We're going down to Wallace Lake, and we've left our sleeping bags and most of our food. We did take a tent with us. Here we are with our tent. We slept inside the tent overnight. Cody's studying a map on the left. And again, heading cross country, we're looking at Mount Tyndall on the right. And it happened to be a huge scree slope. And it took a lot out of us to take a step up and slide down a few inches. If you've all been on scree, you know what that's like. And this was like a 3,000-foot surface that we had to gain. So our idea of getting it all done, Tyndall and Williamson and back to our packs, was fast fading. And in fact, we did Tyndall and went down into the Williamson Bowl and spent the night. We found a little foxhole-like area and unfolded the tent and put it over us because it rained overnight. And this is us drawing the tent out the next morning. And then we're facing Williamson, which was very much a maze. And we had to backtrack more than once. We had gone through all of our food for one day, except for maybe a few hard candies, and purposely decided, since we weren't going to get back to our packs again, in fact, we weren't even going to get to Wallace Lake, we purposely decided to head for the nearest trees. So we went down and to George Creek.
We didn't want a cold camp.
Yeah, we wanted a fire. We wanted to sleep around a fire since we had no sleeping bags. So this is evening is coming on the left. And then the next day we went over kind of a notch next to Mount Barnard, and there is Wallace Lake. So we had to get down there. Then here's Whitney, and here's Mount Russell, and our packs are over out of the photo to the left. So we had to work our way down around Wallace Lake and up the draw to our packs where we had food. Well, we got there and we heated up some soup and some very light things. But we didn't cook a full meal. We were anxious to get out of there. So it was nighttime when we made our way back down to the Whitney Trail, or hopefully to the Whitney Trail. And we didn't get that far. We got up to the river, and we were a thicket of willows away from crossing the river, and we couldn't figure out, the willows were so thick and the river was fairly fast. So we spent one more night out. Little did we know our one day's worth of food we ran out, of course, and it was 4 days later when we finally got to the car. But the good news is we went to Bobo's Bonanza and had a victory meal, and we could eat anything we want. Well, in my case, my stomach was much smaller than my eyes. And we had been making this incredible list of things all along to motivate ourselves. Like, what'll you have at Bobo's? When we had nothing else to eat, we looked forward to our trip here to this restaurant. And anyway, we got to the Dow Villa again, and I threw up. And of course, Dad took that as an opportunity to say, "Isn't this fun, Jimmy?" And so we had a great time in our misery. Cody?
Thank you. So, so we were learning. We did what we could before we got to California to anticipate the conditions and the climbs, but our research was sketchy. So what we hadn't sufficiently factored in were because there was really almost no mining history in these mountains because of the creation of the John Muir Wilderness. There weren't a bunch of roads that went up high into the peaks like there are in Colorado. So you're typically starting at 7,000 or 8,000 feet, not at 10.5 or 11,000 feet. So these mountains were more work. It was hotter, it was drier, which made it feel again hotter. And we'd already expended a lot of energy. We checked our weights at about this point, and we all had lost weight. Tyle, who wasn't very big to start with, went from 56 to 49, and which is 1/8, 12.5%. I had lost 12.5%. Flint and Quade had lost nearly 10% of their body weight. And so we said, okay, we got to start eating more. We don't need to do this. And we're gonna make amends in the Palisades. We're not gonna starve ourselves. So we in both those groups carried humongous packs. You can see them on the left. You've seen them maybe a little bit before. And in the Palisades, we thought, okay, even before we left Colorado, we had allocated 6 days to the Palisades according to Flint's plan. So we thought, okay, this would be relatively leisurely, and we'll take 6 days worth of food. And after packing in over Bishop Pass and getting maybe 10 miles less far than we wanted to get on the first day, we changed our plan again. And instead of carrying our full packs all the way down the range to the south and then working our way back up north, we thought, well, let's just not do that. Let's make a camp here pretty far north in the range and then work our way down south and back with smaller loads. So that's what we did. The book has got a series of maps that mark out our path, and it's pretty, Quade, go back, please. And it's pretty interesting what the terrain is, because the guidebooks talk about even then the couple we could find and talking to people talk about climbing an individual peak, but we really felt like we were on our own adventure, linking these peaks from one to the next without going back down into the valley and moving camp. So the picture on the right is on the ridge between North Palisade and Mount Sill. And this, you can see this is pretty good looking rock, solid, reliable, at least for this one day. And we're having I think a pretty good outing. You can see that Tyle has upgraded from his Kershaw Red Baron cotton sweatshirt to my partially wool red and gray sweater. So
Thanks, Cody.
I know he was grateful for that. So after North and Sill, we returned to our what I'll call our northern in the range camp, and we said, okay, we have Middle and Split to do, and why don't we just get an early start and run for it and get back to camp? And so this, a little bit, it sounds familiar. So that's what we did. We did have our earliest start, I think, of the whole trip. And I think it's in the book. It might have been 7 a.m. It's that for us was early. You try it with 4 teenagers sometime and see how it goes. Okay, next.
I wasn't a teenager.
Yeah, almost teenager. So it was so dry that whenever we came across water, we really enjoyed it. And so that's Tyle enjoying a bit of water. And to the right now, we're on Middle Palisade, which is, once you get to the base of the vertical part of it, it's about 1,000 feet up on rock like this. And mostly, but not totally good climbing. I remember some spots where we knew the rock required quite a bit of caution. Next. Okay, yeah, you can get a sense so that's Middle Palisade there. Quade's in the middle. I'm on the right using a little bit of a dihedral to gain ground. And so we had a long day from our camp, climbed Middle Palisade, didn't get anywhere near climbing also Split Mountain. And so once again, we make a camp where we can find it. The good news was we got down to where there were trees. And so that's our bivouac camp above the Palisade Lakes. And so in our, after several bivouacs in the Whitney group, only one of which we had the benefit of a warm fire, this actually felt pretty good on the bivouac scale to us. Okay, next. So finally we go over Mather Pass, continue south and get on top of Split Mountain. And so now we're looking back. So Quade's got the arrow on Middle Palisade and we had that bivouac the night before was just basically to the left and down from it. Yeah, down in there. Eventually you get down there and there's some trees. In the middle back there, that's Mount Sill, which we had climbed 2 days before, along with, to the left of Mount Sill, North Palisade, and then made our way that night back to our camp, which is where somewhere near that arrow there. So it's quite a ways, and there's some up and down terrain along the way. So we're on top of Split Mountain now. We're the last time we saw our food cache was 2 days ago, and we're eager to try to get back to it yet that day. But regrettably, we didn't. We got there the next day and gorged ourselves, and then finished up with Thunderbolt Peak and made our way back out to Bishop.
So after climbing Mount Shasta, after climbing the Palisades, we slept at the Inyo Mono Inn in Bishop. And the next morning we left for Shasta after doing some laundry and having a lunch at a burger joint. We drove all day and all night to Shasta, and about midnight, we were coming into Red Bluff. And what we learned is that when Alan Olson's gas gauge reads E, it's empty. There's nothing left, and there's no reserve. And we ran out of gas and had to push Alan Olson about a mile up to a Chevron station. And we didn't have a Chevron card though. So we bought $1 worth of gas, and then we drove to a Shell station where Dad used his credit card to fill up. On the right there is the top of Shasta, and we made it to the top of Shasta, and we're coming down, and Flint wasn't feeling very well, but he toughed it out, and we got through Shasta, and all we had was Rainier to do, and we were going to be through. So heading to Rainier, our routine for Alan Olson, I mentioned the oil problem that Leo Curto mentioned. Well, as it turns out, we needed to add 2 quarts of oil every 100 miles. So we would buy cases upon cases of oil for this journey. And it was unbelievable how much oil Alan Olson burned. So here we are at Paradise on the right there, about to embark to Camp Muir, which is halfway up Mount Rainier. We have about 9,000 feet to go. And today is, this picture is taken September 1st. We're supposed to be back in Denver September 1st to start school, but we're not there yet. So we also have an interview scheduled with a reporter from the Seattle Times for tomorrow, September 2nd at 3 p.m., which we hope to be able to make. So we headed to Muir, and when we got there, the wind was howling. It was blowing like crazy. We set up the tent, and we cooked some soup inside the tent and tried to get some rest, but the wind was relentless, and it blew down the sides of our tent, and we didn't get any rest. We didn't feel like getting up early to go hike Rainier, so we just stayed in the tent, and finally in the morning we said we better get up. The wind's not dying down. The sun was out. So we roped up. We were ready to go do Rainier, but we just didn't go do Rainier. We said, well, let's go back to Paradise and meet with that reporter. Okay, we'll do that. So we went all the way down 4,500 vertical feet to Paradise to have that interview with that Seattle Times reporter, and we didn't find one. Didn't find him there. We looked for an hour. He wasn't there. So we decided, well, let's go back up to Camp Muir. But Flint was not feeling well. he could barely walk at this point. And Dad, we never had to climb. He never made us climb. It was always our choice, and he never forced us. And so after talking with Flint, he said, Flint, you stay and sleep in Alan Olson, and we'll see you when we get back. And so the rest of us headed up to Camp Muir. And the next day, September 3rd, we climbed Rainier via the Disappointment Cleaver route, and came back down to Camp Muir, gathered up all our stuff, and headed back down to Paradise. So, and where we found Flint, by the way, in much better condition. So Flint was determined to get Mount Rainier as soon as possible. So he went back the next June and climbed it. Right, Flint?
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if it was the stress or who knows what back in those days, but yeah, I wasn't feeling well when we were on the way to Shasta. Hitchhiking was easier back then, and I know we pulled out once and I didn't feel good, and there was a hitchhiker, and I think he thought we were stopping and pick him up, but I opened the door and threw up on the road. And then we went and climbed Shasta. Yeah, and then we got to Rainier, and coming back down, I couldn't go back up. So we got, I was fortunate enough with a friend of mine in high school that we'd climbed some 14ers with. And after graduation, we went up and went through Rainier Mountaineering. It was a pretty young outfit then. And got to meet Lou Whitaker, whose twin brother Jim is the first American on Everest. And that helped start and plant the seed for the rest of the story later on, when we learned snow climbing and rescue and pulleys and all those things, which set my life on a different kind of track. And got Rainier in June before I turned, I think I was still 17 then. So it did work out okay. I remember them laughing at us because they had leather boots and plastic was just starting to come in for snow. But it was a good time. Had a good time on that mountain. So eventually I was able to go and get it and join the rest of my brothers and my dad with climbing all 68 14ers in the United States, 67, 68. Yeah.
At that time, 67.
We lost Grizzly, we lost Stewart, but anyway.
Yeah, they hadn't added Ellingwood yet, so that's why it was 67. So as Flint says, he was 17. Our dad was 41 when we finished Rainier. Tyle was 10. I was 12, Quade 13, as you can see. And, we felt a sense of accomplishment, as you might imagine. And I don't think there's any exact database on this, but we had, through the years, and especially back then, we were in touch with a number of people who had done, who we'd learned about, who we'd written letters to. And we think at that time, maybe we were 12 through 16 in terms of finishing the 14ers in the contiguous US. So there's more climbing in the lives of the Smiths. The book stops after 1969 from that standpoint, and so we'll stay true to that tonight. And Dad, in his later years, continued to be a square dance caller by day, a round dance cuer. That's what they call the person giving instructions for round dancing. And the common link, pardon me, the common link there is he was kind of an independent proprietor. He liked figuring out what to do. He liked being his own boss, but he was not a solitary man. In the course of his 70 years of square dance calling, we think he had 10,000 evenings with dancers, and what he really was a teacher. He liked teaching. In the mountains with us, he was teaching, and on the dance floor with his dancers, he was teaching. and he was independent, yeah, but he had so many close relationships, and he wasn't an I'm okay, you're okay kind of guy. He was if you want to do a little bit better, try it this way, or think about it this way. And he had a huge following in the dance community. Dad was on his 5th time around the 14ers, the 2 times with us. He climbed them all again with his square dance industry great friend, Butch Pritchett. And Dad remarried, and his second wife, Peggy, was an eager climber, and they finished him. So he kept climbing really for as long as he could, up to the point probably late 70s or 80 years old. Dad was not an international traveler, but we did have one great experience in the Alps in 1989, and I think Flint's the right person to talk about that.
Yes, his friend Warren, it goes clear back to Warren, back to full circle. Warren was in the service. Obviously, they wouldn't let our father be in the service because of his arm. But when Warren was in the service and he was stationed in Germany, where Warren met his wife, Warren climbed the Matterhorn back in the 50s or 60s. And he spoke very highly of that mountain to our father, because they remained good friends throughout the rest of their life. And so one thing he wanted to do was, if he ever got to Europe, was climb the Matterhorn. And we were able to do that in 1969. Cody and I were able to go over to Europe with him, and he climbed the Jungfrau. And we got done with that and went down, and said, hopefully we thought, well, that's enough. And he said, what do you want to do, Dad? I'd like to climb the Matterhorn. So we went and did climb the Matterhorn with him in 89. And that put him almost 60 years old when he did that.
61.
61 years old when he did that. We were staying at one of the hotels owned by a guide who had gotten hit by a rock on the Matterhorn, and it screwed his hip up. And he was impressed that Dad climbed the Matterhorn with his bad hand, all the way up and all the way down. So that ended up being one of his fond memories of a climb. And I was pretty blessed to be able to do that with him. As I mentioned earlier, we were all Eagle Scouts. Dad was part of Troop 1 in Denver, and during the war, as we mentioned earlier in the book, that troop was kids and he was in charge. They had a lot of respect. Everybody in that troop were Eagle Scouts. My brothers and I were all Eagle Scouts also. We were all in Troop 258. He was in Troop 1. Our father had 61 merit badges by the time he left the Boy Scouts. And he received a National Outstanding Eagle Award in September of 2019, which is pretty special. So right there, you're looking at 5 Eagles that amassed quite a few years. But you need to read the book. It's an interesting story on all this. And our father was an interesting man, and he definitely instilled in us the not if, but how. And that's just only the beginning. So you should read the book. And we'd like to thank you. We might have run a little long, but I'll let somebody else close for us.
So thanks, Flint. So look, we think of these as our family stories, and the backdrop is the mountains. And that was where Dad could could work on us to improve our capabilities as individuals, but also to work as a team and to cover for each other when one of us needed it and the other one was strong. And so it's also the book's also a story about overcoming a hardship. Nobody could ever get Dad to say he was handicapped. He didn't think he was. He would say, I just have to do it differently. I have to do things differently. And since he was, 4 years old, he had to figure out, mostly on his own, how to make something work in a world that was not made for a guy with one usable hand. And I know we all, whenever we might have felt puny about something, just had to think a little bit about what it's like to go through life and the mountains, as with the tools that our dad had. So we're hopefully got time for a question or two. This was maybe a little bit chaotic and slow, just like climbing with 4 kids. And we appreciate your interest and your patience.
Wow, boys, what a great presentation. I just I just have to say, speaking on behalf of everyone on here that is either a son or a daughter, which is probably most of us, what a great thing you're doing, honoring your dad here and telling this story and spreading the news about this book, because it's inspiring and it's touching. So I think a lot of us out here are jealous of the way you were brought up and your continued relationship today. So thanks for sharing that with us. And with that, we've got a few questions. The first one to come across, I think you answered pretty well. Back when you first climbed Long's Peak, was peak bagging a thing back then?
No, it wasn't. Mountaineering, the mountain was the total thing, and you had to climb snow, you might have to climb ice, you might have to use ropes, you might have to climb rock. But to be a mountaineer, you had to do everything, and it wasn't a race. It was learning how to be safe and navigate in the hills, use your map, use your compass. There was no GPS back then. You were pretty much on your own. So peak bagging was not a thing.
So the question right after that was, did anyone have a fear of heights, either when they started this as young boys or at any point during that?
No, not for me.
Yeah.
I think we went so gradually from, flat to slide uphill to more uphill to maybe use your hands once in a while. I think the progression was gradual enough. I'm projecting across my 3 brothers that we got very comfortable. But our dad's point of view was don't assume you can't do it, but don't try not to get into a spot where you're in trouble. And part of how he let us do that was by experimenting with gradually harder stuff. And, not actually, you can tell by all the times in the book that describe climbing at finishing up back at the car at night, we weren't in a hurry. We were going to find the route that was comfortable for us. And so I think for me and anybody that feels has a different answer, the answer was no, not really. We're comfortable with heights because we learned to trust ourselves.
And we had confidence in our abilities.
Yeah.
You had to, after seeing that photo on North Palisade. I mean, that made my palms sweat, and I've climbed it. So good job. So I don't know if when you made the first lap, if Calibra was a 14er counted then, but
Yeah.
The question was, what was it like to climb Calibra in the 60s? And did you still have to make special arrangements back then?
Who wants that? I have some memory.
The first time
Well, no, we did. Kyle, you got that one?
Yeah, the
We
first
did
time.
stop it.
The first time we climbed Calabra, we did not go through what was then the Taylor Ranch. as access. We did it, we bypassed that, if you will, because we weren't willing to pay that. It was a lot of money back then to have to climb Calabria. And Dad felt that we could do it on our own, and we just did it from a different approach, using maps and figuring it out. And you couldn't do that today, though. They won't let you do that today.
Well, now they're serious. Back then, I think they were just charging to use their road, and I think now, because it's their private property prerogative, they don't want you on the property without, passing through go.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you. The next was not a question, just a statement, he says, and it is, I've listened to countless slideshows and been climbing presentations, and this has been by far the most enjoyable. I smiled the whole time. What a beautiful story about all of you, but especially your father. I can only hope my sons will say 1/10 of the positive things you have to say about your own dad. Well done, guys. Love your stories and love for our 14ers. So,
Thank you.
agreed.
Very nice.
Ditto.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you.
How long did Tyle hold the record for being the youngest to climb all the 14ers?
In Colorado, I held it for 28 years.
Whoa.
Gal by the name of Megan Emmons in 1996 was 7 years old when she finished the 14ers. Now that since has been bettered by one of Andrew Hamilton's boys.
Oh,
So I think he's 6, is the current record holder for Colorado.
wow. Wow. Yeah, that's young. That's young. I'm sure in a few years you'll see a papoose going up. Two questions. You mentioned all the oil that your car burned. Can you remind us youngsters how you opened automobile oil back then?
A can opener.
Yeah.
People used to take the top off of a beer bottle, for example,
Yep.
with a triangular
Church key.
pointed
Yeah.
key. And that's how we,
Church keys.
yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
And also, do you have any feelings or thoughts about the huge number of people on the 14ers now? Some reports have it that there have been 500 cars parked along Stevens Gulch for Grays and Tories. And I personally was on Bierstadt a couple weeks ago, and the CFI peak steward said at that moment there were 600 people on that 3-mile trail.
Wow.
From my point of view, on the one hand, it's wonderful that people are out in the out of doors, exploring the mountains, experiencing the mountains. Certainly the volume of people changes the experience. It's one thing to kind of get into a meditative state of mind as you're breathing and hiking and going uphill, and there aren't a bunch of people around you. And that's kind of an existential experience. Whereas now I understand people are more interested in, as well, the phrase peak bagging. People are more interested in going light and going quick, and it's a different experience. I can't say I don't want them in the mountains, but I hope that they respect the mountains and are, that their heart's in the right place.
Yeah, I would just add, okay, so the 14ers are crowded. You gotta pick your day of the week or your month of the year, or hopefully pick a 13 or a 12,000 foot peak. There's so much out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. So, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not trying to connect a climbing analogy with something at work or something with my kids. Any solid lessons that you have to share with the group that you learned in the mountains that you use in business or personal life or whatnot?
I think it's all Dad's. It's in the book. It's Dad's thought cards. There were, I don't know how many we put in the book, but we didn't put nearly all of them in the book. But there are things like worry on time, which was his version of, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I'm not
One of the
gonna,
other things was, I can add something to that. One of the big ones that we kept trying to promote with our climbing school and throughout the years with people is you try to leave each day better than you found it. And even if that's picking up one piece of trash you see, but you're leaving that day better than you found it. And that was one of the bigger philosophies.
And try and avoid problems. Think around the corner was another thing he used to say.
And don't make
Yeah, but
don't make a job out of a job.
unfortunately, common sense isn't one of the curriculums in college. So that's a tough one to teach.
Well, spoken like true Eagle Scouts, I know leave the place better than you found it comes right out of the manual from when we were kids for sure. So, well, tell me about any close calls. We all like the scary stories.
Well, on Capitol, it was dark. We were coming down. We didn't want to do the coxcomb coming back. We did that going up, and it was quite slow.
It was a mistake.
Yeah. So we said, well, let's get off the ridge and come down. Oh, there's a snowfield. And so we came down the snowfield, but at that hour, the snow was quite hard. And Tyle, being not very heavy and being young, had a heck of a time. Flint did his best to kick steps for us as with the heel as we went down, but we had to be very careful and slow. So then we got close to an edge or a ridge and decided we wanted to use our rope. Flint was going to go ahead and set up a position, and Dad was going to be at the back end of the rope, and we all would go across this section that was above kind of a cliff. And Tyle at one point was going across, and the next thing we knew, he was hanging onto the rope with his hands over his head, and his feet were looking for but couldn't find any place to grab. And so Dad, of course, and Flint were preoccupied, so Dad sent me to go get Tyle across this thing, and all he needed really was for me to put his foot on some solid rock so he could lift himself up and continue after that. But it was a little bit scary.
Yeah, sounds like it.
It's what all 8-year-olds do at the time.
Well, I know climbing dramatically shifted the trajectory of my life. And Flint, you mentioned that. I'd love to hear in what way, and from the other brothers, if climbing, affected and changed a trajectory for you.
We did go on, as I mentioned. Dad climbed the Devil's Tower. I had a relationship with Bill Forrest. He was a good friend of mine, and he worked with me to help figure out ways for technical rock stuff that we rigged an armband for our father, and then he was able to change using a fox head, using a cliff hanger, using something else, so that right arm could just hold him in place while he moved his left arm if he was rock climbing. So, we were able to be successful on the Devil's Tower. A different time was we all climbed the Grand Teton. Also, I went on to, they didn't have outdoor education when I went to school. That became a new thing. But I went to Western and helped start the mountain rescue team there. I've ski patrolled for 50 years professionally. And it helped me. I used to do off-road education for volunteer teams to cars to drive off the road. Well, there weren't a whole lot of mountain rescue teams back then that you could call to go get somebody. A lot of fire departments didn't know how to do it. So I have and taught. We had our own climbing school. I had another climbing business of my own. Would teach off-road rescue to these places. I've been a paramedic for 30 years, and I've been a flight paramedic. And so I've used all this stuff.
The Mars
Um,
device.
Yeah, it designed the evacuation system and patented it, the one they use in Aspen. I figured out a way to ride the cable and not take it off while I pass the carriers. And so trams, gondolas, chairlifts, you name it, you can ride the cable. So that kind of sent me that direction.
Wow. Well, I have to ask, is anyone in the group still climbing 14ers or mountains?
We all are.
Are you?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Absolutely. I've got a streak going since I was 6 years old. I climb at least one 14,000 foot peak every year, and for my chronological age and also calendar year, every year since 1966. So I've got 55 straight years of and counting. I haven't done one this year yet, but I will.
All right, I've got a little insider knowledge on this, but I want to start with Tyle and go from youngest to oldest. How many laps on the 14ers have you done?
I'm on my 9th time.
Cody?
In Colorado, I'm on my 4th time, and I've got two unfinished peaks in California before I can say I'm on my 4th time on the West Coast.
Right on. Quade?
I would say I'm on my 4th time. There was a period in there that I didn't track all my 14ers, and I have to try and recreate that now. I know who I climbed with, but I don't know exactly when. And so I know I've done 3. So I'm saying I'm probably a couple peaks short on my 4th time around.
And how about you, Flint?
I've done all 68 3 times. I'm on my 4th time with Colorado.
Right on. Well, and Cody and I had a discussion about this years ago. I'm interested. What's the difference in the 14ers when your dad did them and when you're doing them now? I know we've had some changes, some adds and some subtracts.
Well, everybody's probably got their own answer. I mean, it's just as we touched on, you've got to work harder to have what I'll call a wilderness experience.
Yep.
Than you used to. And I think you've got to work harder to have an adventure experience and, kind of resist reading everybody's trip report and, kind of find, I'm not saying go unprepared, but I'm saying read a guidebook, read the map, learn the exit routes if the weather turns bad. I mean, I think people are much more casual now. And, we think great things happen in the outdoors. We think people being outdoors is tremendous because I think I'm momentarily a better human after I spend time in the wilderness and in the mountains, and I'm pretending that everybody probably is, but we are over loving our mountains, and I think it's become I think there's evidence that there are people that don't have maybe the caution that we would urge people to have to make sure they can have a long life of enjoying the mountains.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, when I look back at doing 14ers, more than the route, many times I remember the people I did that with, and your lucky group of boys to have experienced that together. I'll be respectful of everyone's time and wrap this up with a statement we had from a member that said, and to think that when I would wake up my own young kids up to go skiing or climbing the 14ers, they would refuse and say, it's too much hassle. You're a very special family. Your stories have inspired me to do a 14ers do-over now that my kids are young adults and have the interest to build our own memories. I'll buy the book, and hopefully this is fulfilling one of the reasons why you compiled the book. Thank you all so very much for sharing.
Thank you for having us.
Outpost Mountain Club, the Climbing Smiths. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, you know how to access the book. There's a link in the chat, as well as you can go on the Colorado Mountain Club website. So, all right, boys, thanks. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Keegan.
Thank you all. See you out on the trail.
Mm.